This is not breaking news. This is not a scandal. This is not about one person. This is something quieter than that and more dangerous. You're not watching a crisis arrive. You're already inside it. Nothing here explodes. Nothing announces itself. The system keeps moving. Money still changes hands. Orders still get signed. People still go to work. And yet something essential has slipped out of alignment. Power performs. Reality absorbs the cost. While attention is pulled upward towards spectacle, noise, distraction, pressure builds below the surface. In households, in workplaces, in cities that feel tighter every month. This is how systemic failure now operates. Not through collapse, through normalization. If you felt like something is off but can't quite name it, stay with me. Because what comes next isn't about outrage. It's about mechanics. And once you see the mechanism, you can't unsee it. Now, let's talk about what actually controls the system. We're trained to think power looks loud, speeches, votes, faces at podiums, but that's no longer where control lives. What actually runs the system now is not leadership, it's permission. Permission for chaos to proceed without consequence. Permission for contradiction to coexist without correction. Permission for institutions to keep functioning while meaning drains out of them. The system is no longer steered, it's managed around disruption. Economic stress doesn't stop policy, it's absorbed. Public outrage doesn't trigger reform, it's redirected. Foreign tension doesn't demand clarity, it's deferred. And while everyone argues about personalities, the machinery keeps doing what it's been quietly retooled to do: transfer pressure downward and delay accountability upward. This is why nothing ever seems to resolve. Every problem becomes background noise. Every shock becomes survivable until it isn't. Control now belongs to whatever can outlast attention. And that shift didn't happen overnight. It happened slowly. So slowly, most people missed it. That's where we go next. There was a time when instability triggered alarms. Markets reacted. Allies demanded answers. Institutions pushed back. Before, disruption forced decisions. Now, disruption is the operating environment. The shift was subtle, almost polite. Economic strain stopped being treated as an emergency and started being framed as resilience. Diplomatic aggression stopped being shocking and started being described as leverage. Domestic force stopped being exceptional and started being called enforcement. Nothing snapped, nothing reset. The danger wasn't the change itself, it was the pace. Slow change doesn't feel like loss. It feels like adaptation, until you realize you're adapting to things that used to be unacceptable. This is how systems hollow out without collapsing. They keep the shape. They lose the function. People adjust their expectations downward, institutions adjust their standards sideways, and power learns it can move further each time without resistance. By the time anyone notices, the baseline is gone. And then something happens that feels sudden, but isn't. That's where this turns concrete. Then the system gives you a moment that feels impossible to ignore. Images that don't belong together start appearing side by side: lavish excess and controlled force. On one end, insulated power performs normalcy, celebration, costumes, rituals that signal distance from consequence. On the other, the state flexes inward, crowds dispersed, chemical agents released, flash and pressure used not as last resorts, but as routine tools. This is not chaos, it's coordination, because these aren't separate stories. They are the same system expressing itself in two directions at once. Upward, comfort is protected. Downward, compliance is enforced. And while people argue over taste, decorum, or behavior, something more important slips past unnoticed. The threshold has moved. What once required justification now requires only logistics. What once caused scandal now causes fatigue. If you're wondering how those images can coexist without triggering an immediate reckoning, that's the point. This isn't the crisis, it's the signal. And the mechanism behind it is already active. Here's the mechanism. The system no longer resolves pressure. It routes it. Economic stress doesn't reach decision makers. It gets filtered through households, through debt, through rent, through jobs that pay just enough to keep people stuck. Political fallout doesn't stop policy. It gets outsourced to time. Delay long enough and outrage decays on its own. Even international risk is handled this way. Tension is spread, responsibility is blurred, money moves through indirect channels so no single hand appears to be holding it. Who benefits is simple, those insulated from immediacy. Who absorbs the damage is also simple. everyone else. This is why nothing ever quite breaks and nothing ever heals. The system is designed to stay functional while transferring costs downward and outward. You feel it as instability. Institutions experience it as continuity. And once that routing mechanism is in place, escalation becomes automatic. Not because anyone chooses it, but because there's nowhere else for the pressure to go. That's when the second shock arrives. Faster, sharper, and harder to ignore. Then the pressure speeds up. Decisions come faster. Explanations get shorter. Contradictions stop being resolved at all. Domestic enforcement expands. Not with announcements, with repetition. Foreign posture hardens, not through strategy, through impulse and signal. Money moves again, not transparently, but efficiently. Each move, on its own, looks survivable. Each one framed as temporary, necessary, contained. But stacked together, they create momentum. The system isn't correcting anymore, it's compounding. Institutions stop asking whether something should happen and start asking whether it can be managed. Allies stop waiting for clarity and start preparing for unpredictability. Workers stop expecting respect and start bracing for impact. Nothing here feels like a breaking point. That's what makes it dangerous, because acceleration doesn't announce itself as collapse. It feels like speed. And once a system starts moving this fast, control becomes an illusion. You don't steer momentum, you ride it until it throws something or someone off. That's where the cost stops being abstract. This is where it reaches you. Not as a headline, not as a policy debate, but as weight. You feel it when prices rise faster than explanations, when work feels more precarious but expectations don't adjust, when stability becomes something you manage alone. The system calls this flexibility. You experience it as exhaustion. You're told things are under control while you absorb more risk. You're asked to stay calm while the rules keep shifting. You're expected to adapt while the people insulated from consequence don't have to. This is the human role in a routed system. You buffer the shock. If you felt tension without a clear cause, that's not anxiety, that's signal. And if you're wondering why none of this seems to trigger immediate change, remember, systems like this don't respond to pain. They respond to disruption. If this feels uncomfortably familiar, don't look away. Share this. Stay with it. Because what's happening to individuals doesn't stay individual for long. It spreads. What begins as internal pressure never stays contained. When unpredictability becomes policy, others adjust. Quietly, defensively, allies stop assuming stability and start planning around volatility. Military exercises multiply, not as provocation, but as insurance. Diplomacy becomes less about trust and more about containment. Economic ripples move the same way. Money reroutes, supply chains tense. Neutral spaces suddenly matter more than transparent ones. None of this is announced as a rupture. It's framed as coordination, preparation, normal caution. But the signal is unmistakable. When a system becomes unreliable, the world doesn't wait for clarification. It hedges, it hardens, it distances itself while staying publicly polite. This is how influence erodes without a single dramatic loss. Power still speaks, but fewer people listen the same way. And once that shift begins, it's very difficult to reverse because credibility doesn't collapse, it thins. What comes next isn't about reaction. It's about trajectory. And trajectories don't care about intention. From here, the system has three possible paths. None of them are clean. The first is adjustment. Pressure is acknowledged, just enough. The system redistributes risk more carefully. Stability is patched, not repaired. Life continues, but tighter. More conditional, more managed. The second is erosion. Nothing dramatic happens. Institutions keep functioning. But trust drains away. Compliance replaces consent. People disengage without rebelling. The system survives by lowering expectations again. And then there's rupture, not collapse. Rupture is selective, a strike that doesn't land where anyone predicted, a foreign miscalculation, a domestic overreach, a financial channel that seizes up. Rupture doesn't come from anger. It comes from misalignment, from systems moving faster than their own legitimacy. Which path emerges won't be decided by rhetoric or personalities or even elections. It will be decided by how much pressure the system continues to route and how long it assumes the buffer will hold. That assumption has a shelf life, and we're closer to it than most people think. This doesn't end with a warning siren. There's no moment where someone stands at a podium and admits the system slipped too far. There's no clean line between between before and after. What you get instead is continuity. The same structures, the same language, less margin for error. That's how systems fail now. They don't break, they thin, and when they thin enough, even small shocks travel further than they should. If you're waiting for clarity before paying attention, it won't come. Clarity only appears in hindsight. What matters is whether enough people recognize the pattern while it's still forming, not to panic, not to moralize, but to stay oriented, because orientation is power. If this felt unsettling, that's not an accident. It means you're still tracking reality instead of spectacle. Stay with this. Question what feels normalized. Watch where pressure is being sent instead of where attention is being pulled. The next video goes deeper into what happens when routed systems finally meet a limit. You won't want to miss it.